Hello, everybody. This is Michael Butterman, music director of the Boulder Philharmonic, and I'm delighted today to be chatting with the principal clarinetist of the Boulder Phil, Stephanie Zelnick, who is joining me today via Zoom from her home in Kansas, where she is a professor at the University of Kansas. And we are actually introducing the third and fourth movements of Brahms' Second Symphony, a piece that the Boulder Phil played back in 2015. Actually, it's a concert, Stephanie, that you didn't happen to be playing at the time. You were probably back in Kansas. I don't quite recall the circumstances. But I wanted to just, before we talk about that piece and maybe clarinet playing in general, let's just kind of orient people a little bit to your time in the Phil. You predated my arrival. So you've been in the Phil how long? Do you remember when you joined?
You know, I don't remember if it was 2001 or 2002, but yeah, it's been about 20, coming up on 20 years here, because of course I got that job when I was 5, so yeah.
Right. And so you lived in Colorado, or at least, or I mean, in Boulder, was it at the time? I don't.
Yeah, I was living in Colorado. I was teaching up at University of Wyoming and playing in Central City Opera, and I was just kind of doing the Colorado freeway fill all over the place. So
Right.
yeah.
And yeah, you played Central City as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I did Central City Opera for, I think it was 16 or 17
Oh,
seasons.
wow. Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow, wow, wow.
yeah.
So right now you are, like a few of our musicians, someone who resides outside of Colorado and who comes in for the period of days that we rehearse and then put a concert on, which is a big undertaking for you because you have to get yourself to Colorado. You have teaching responsibilities at the university. You have a young daughter. You have a husband. I mean, you've got all kinds of
Yeah.
things to juggle. How do you manage that?
Well, my husband, we always laugh every time we go out because you basically have to make 2 turns to get to Colorado because we live right off of I-70. So, you know, we just go right, get on the highway, and get off in Colorado and go north. And it's not too bad, you know.
Right.
If there's, I don't know, an easier drive than that one. And it's worth it. You know, it's one of the things that we were talking about even before this. It's just such a special community. So it's not really something that's replaceable in my life. So even though it's not next door, it's definitely worth it.
Right. Well, we are really blessed, I think, that you've been able to continue your association with the Phil through this period of years, and you know, we look forward to many, many more. We are going to be hearing this work by Brahms, as I mentioned. The third movement reminds me of a really of a serenade, I think, more than a scherzo, for example. Although there are some faster moments in it. Although actually the oboes are perhaps a little more prominent than the clarinets in this movement. You know, there is so much of Brahms' writing that is serenade-like, and woodwinds are a big part of that. And yet there are other moments, like in the shortly after the fourth movement begins, there's a sort of soaring clarinet solo. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about your role in the woodwind section. Sometimes you are a soloist, and sometimes you're part of an ensemble, and sometimes you're actually, when I say an ensemble, I mean like a woodwind serenade kind of sound, and sometimes you're just sort of supporting maybe what's going on in the strings. You're playing maybe just pedal tones or something like this. Is there a difference in the way that you approach those roles in terms of the technique that you use, or just the way that you prepare to play those parts?
Well, that's a great question. I would say it really relates well to Brahms because the feeling when you're playing a Brahms symphony is just of such needed versatility, because you really do, you know, like you're talking about the beginning of the third movement, you're definitely in such an accompaniment role with the oboe, but then, as you know, all of a sudden you immediately have to interject some really important material, and just being able to kind of change colors, and you go from being kind of a good Lutheran alto to, you know, suddenly having to sing the melody over the top. And it takes really kind of being present to be able to go from being that sort of chorale member to being all of a sudden the big soloist, and then back and forth. But Brahms just writes so well that it's really just pretty, I think everyone would agree, it's a pretty natural feeling to play. It shifts so well between major and minor. He shifts who's the important voice, you know, sometimes phrase by phrase, sometimes, you know, a quarter of a phrase at a time. And it's just so well put together. But yeah, that's a good kind of analog for what it's probably like to be a musician, right? You're putting on so many different hats, you know, definitely definitely as a professor, I'm in a way different mindset in some ways than I am when I'm performing, because I've got to really make it all about the student in that time if I'm going to be a good teacher.
Yeah.
And then definitely chamber music is a whole different thing, and being a soloist is, of course, you know, you're just out there and it's all about you. And then something that is so wonderful about orchestral playing is this sort of balance, a good life-work balance within the orchestra too, that it's not always all about you, right?
Yes.
It's kind of
Right,
about
right,
what's going on, organism, you know?
right.
So, yeah.
It's about understanding your role in the ecosystem, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like a beautiful garden that you have behind you,
Oh, yes, right.
coming together so well, you know, and that's kind of like when it's working in an orchestra, that's what it can be like.
You mentioned, being a professor. So I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I guess I'm going to. So, Brahms is one of these composers that I can appreciate just on the surface. It's beautiful. It's there's something about his music that just sort of on a even I might call superficial level speaks to me. But then I sit there with the score and I notice all of these incredible details, like dum bum ba dee bum bum ba da. That's one thing. Yeah, bum ba bum ba. That's like, oh, that's a fast inversion of that basically. And those are two themes from the third movement right there. But you would never have necessarily known that unless you sort of really took the time to analyze it. So I'm wondering, and I'm sure that you, when you're talking with your students, you're talking about technique and so on, but you're also asking them technical matters about the music and what the composer is trying to do here and there.
Yeah.
As a member of the woodwind section, are you? There is no right or wrong answer to this, by the way. But here we go. Are you? Yes. Are you conscious so much of all those sort of motivic transformations that Brahms is involved in and where you are in that matrix? Or are you kind of just, I've got to play these next notes in perfect tune with the bassoons and I'm going to just make sure I do that? What is the mindset as you're playing?
That's such a cool question. No one's ever really asked that, and I'm kind of thinking it through as you're saying it. And you know what's really neat, and I'm sure you have this as a conductor too, is your relationship to music changes throughout your career. Because I think probably, back in my 20s, it really was all about, like, it still is. Clarinet is such a finicky, difficult instrument, just rife with danger. And then you've got two of them. You've got the B flat and A clarinets with you. So anything can go wrong at any moment, right? Which is why clarinetists are famously neurotic. So when I was, younger, I was just really so much concentrating on trying to just get things right. And then revisiting these pieces throughout the decades, you start being able to hear different levels. You react to the music differently as a performer. Now things are definitely getting worse as I get older, but some things are getting better, which is, just kind of hearing different things. When we did West Side Story, remember that? A couple of years we did that kind of fun West Side Story performance. I heard things in that I had never heard when I was younger. I don't know if you have that too. It's every time you play this music, it's a different experience.
Well, certainly with great scores, no matter how many times you experience them or listen to them or conduct them, whatever you might be doing, there is always something else too.
Yeah.
Even Nutcracker, how many times have I conducted that? And every time it's like, oh, yeah, that's really.
Yeah. And you realize something new. Yeah, it's really cool. Or you're like, oh, I never really noticed the French horn was doing that cool, counter melody, just like you're saying. And then I don't know if you'll have this too, but you'll almost get obsessed in that concert set. I'll be like, oh, there's that cool bassoon line, and then it's like whatever that concert set was all about, that cool bass line or something.
Yeah. So it's interesting, how much you have to be sort of in the mind of put one foot in front of the other, do the right technical thing, and how much you can be sort of in the moment, just appreciating the whole thing. I mean, I can relate to what you're describing. When I first started conducting, I can remember thinking that I don't enjoy music as much as I used to when I was more of a performer, because now I'm so worried about everything. Now I have to think about, I'm always concerned about, are we together? Is it in tune? Is everybody following me? And just get it right. And I hope that as I've grown a little bit, that I'm able to kind of be more in the moment and kind of allow a few of those sort of technical details to just happen or not, but just to somehow be more in tune with the emotional content of the music than the nuts and bolts of it somehow.
I think maybe, doesn't it just takes maybe getting a few of the performances under your belt when you're younger to be like, oh, I can do this, and then try to prepare as well as we can, but then know, it's a live performance. And, the reason we like live performances is because something different is going to happen every time. And it's just that connection that's so important. Wasn't there that great thing that happened where Elvis Presley, he recorded one of these, Jailhouse Rock or something. I'm sure I'm getting this story. It's too approximate for, posterity here. But,
Yes, right.
And the sound engineer said, well, it wasn't quite right. I didn't quite, have the microphones in the right place. It wasn't perfect. And he said, well, that's the beauty of live music, is it's different every time you do it.
Yeah.
So of course we want to be accurate and really represent what Brahms wrote and be precise, but also, like you said, the emotional content is so important.
Yeah, well, I think that's really the heart of it, right? I mean, you don't want a performance that's wildly inaccurate, of course, technically speaking, but beyond that, what draws you to a performance is whether there's an emotional connection that you can feel about it, and I think that's why anybody loves music ultimately.
Yeah.
I guess my last question would be the style of playing that you use in music of Brahms versus some other composer's music, for example. In string world, we're always talking about how much vibrato you are to use, what kind of bow strokes are you keeping the intensity all the way to the tip of the bow, or you're kind of letting it die away as you might for music of, let's say, Mozart or Haydn or something. In Brahms, you want a generally a thicker and fuller sound. Are you thinking about those kinds of things in clarinet playing as well, and
Yeah.
how are they manifest?
That is another one of those things that is really fun to evolve over a lifetime. And I'm pretty spoiled that, teaching clarinet all the time, I get to think about these things, not just in my performing, but in teaching, you're just thinking about clarinet all the time.
Yeah.
And getting to know so much more of the circumstances of the composers. So, Brahms actually came out of retirement to write some of the greatest works that we have for clarinet. He wrote our clarinet trio and clarinet quintet in 1891. And 1894, he wrote our two great clarinet sonatas right at the very end of his life. And the reason he came out of retirement is because he heard this great clarinetist, Richard Mohlfeld, who was the clarinetist in the Meiningen Orchestra, I believe. And he just supposedly had the most beautiful dark clarinet sound. So when you're playing that music, you're kind of always thinking about this, like what was so powerful about this instrument that had brought Brahms, back to composing again.
Right.
And I do think it is that just lovely, just dark sound. Response is always really important in key instrument. But definitely if you're doing something like Stravinsky, Soldier's Tale, you got to be like right on the front of the note. And same thing on Brahms. I mean, it needs to speak right away, but with Brahms, you said, that dark kind of thick sound, that's what I'm always thinking about, is what Mohlfeld must have sounded like. And that's what I'm sort of striving for.
Right. Understood. Well, that's fascinating to hear you describe your thinking about all these matters for that matter. And I hope that it's been a nice opportunity for some of our patrons to get to know you a little bit better, a familiar face that they've seen for many years on the stage at Mackey, but maybe haven't had a chance to hear from you as they have today. So I really appreciate your joining me, and I hope you continue to stay well and happy in Kansas until we can be back together in person, which we hope happens very, very soon. But again, we thank you so much, and we're going to continue now with the third and fourth movements of Brahms' Second Symphony, performed by the Boulder Phil back in November of 2015. Again, Stephanie, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Michael. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
you.